So we are very, very excited to welcome Dr. Catherine Meeks to lead us in this conversation tonight. Catherine Meeks is the Executive Director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing. Prior to the center's opening, she chaired its precursor called Beloved Community, Commission for Dismantling Racism for the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. She is a sought-after teacher, author, and workshop leader, and she brings 4 decades of experience to the work of transforming and dismantling racism in Atlanta. The core of her work has been with people who have been marginalized because of economic status, race, gender, or physical ability as they pursue liberation, justice, and access to resources that can help lead them to health, wellness, and a more abundant life. This work, which is really important to us, grows out of her understanding of her call to the vocation of teacher, as well as her realization that all of humanity is one family, which God desires to unite. We look forward to this evening as she speaks with us about the current state of racism in our country, and most especially how we as Christian leaders are called into racial healing and justice. As you all know, these conversations are critical for the work of our synod, as well as the ELCA, and especially our own personal work as we seek to become a more diverse and just beloved community. So welcome, Dr. Meeks.
Thank you so much. It's really good to be here. And thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to come and spend time reflecting on this, what I think is one of the most important topics that we can be talking about these days as we try to navigate our way through this era of pandemics, the pandemic of COVID-19 and the pandemic of racial unrest. And also environmentally, I think we could probably name so many of the things that are happening to us. Is just another layer of energy that feels like a pandemic, because it seems like the weather has just turned into a expression of rage almost. And then of course the fires out on the West Coast, and all of those things have converged together and created this kind of storm, of chaotic storm that has left us, a lot of us, even those of people like me that have been talking about these subjects for the last 50 years, it's left us reeling a little bit. And so oftentimes it's hard to kind of get our bearings and put our feet down and feel like we're standing on solid ground. So it's always great to be able to sit with a group of people and talk about these issues and talk about some of the things we've done right, and to look at things that we need to do better. So I'm grateful for your interest, grateful for your willingness to spend your time reflecting upon these issues, and more importantly than that, grateful for your commitment to do something about creating a space in this world where all of God's children can be free and can be treated as beloved children of God. I want to begin tonight with the piece of poetry that I sent ahead for you to have, called Last Night I Was Sleeping, which is a poem by Antonio Machado, a Spanish poet, writing about reinvigoration and inspiration. And I think now in this era that we find ourselves, that we all can use a little bit of reinvigorating and a little bit of inspiration. And, despair kind of lurks around the edges of our activities, just waiting for us to forget to take a deep breath and be grateful, because when we forget to take a deep breath and be grateful, we find ourselves inviting despair in if we're not careful. Machado is saying that there's a way not to let that happen to us by being more awake and conscious. Last night, while I was sleeping, I dreamed, blessed illusion, a fountain flowed inside my heart. Water, tell me by what hidden channel you came to me with a spring of new life I never drank. Last night, while I was sleeping, I dreamed, blessed illusion, I dreamed, blessed illusion, a fiery sun glowed inside my heart. It was fiery, giving off heat from a red fireplace. It was the sun, pardon me, throwing out light and made one weep. Last night, while I was sleeping, I dreamed, blessed illusion, that it was God I held inside my heart. Has my heart gone to sleep? Beehives in my dreams? Have you stopped working? Is the water wheel of thought dry, its buckets empty, spinning and filled with shadow? No, my heart is not asleep. It's awake, awake, not sleep or dreaming. It looks with open, bright eyes, far signals, and listens on the shores of a great silence. What wonderful imagery, and then reminders of the ways in which to keep ourselves moving forward and going on the pathway that we need to be going on. When I was a kid in college, after having graduated from high school, substandard education in Arkansas, segregated substandard education, I should say, and going to college in California with just so in over my head, leaving my school where we barely had any kind of decent, we didn't have any decent library, and we had science classes that were really a joke. But leaving there and going to California to school was one of the best things and one of the worst things that could have happened to me. But it helped me to really come to grips with the necessity to look for what was at the core of myself that would help me to be a person who could live in the world and become whoever it was God had put me here to be. So I had to begin on a long journey of asking questions and trying to seek out what was it that I could find that would help me, this little girl from Arkansas who had great hopes and great aspirations, not a lot of good education, but had a good mind and a curiosity that was enough to get me through. It was in that kind of frame that I began to do this work, the work of asking, what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be a human person? What does it mean to be a girl? Because then I was a girl instead of the older crone person that I have become now, which is crone, many of you may know, is the wise old woman in that whole arena of possible archetypes. What did I need and how could I go about finding it? And I wasn't ever quite convinced that I knew the real answer to that, but I was always convinced that I had to be hunting for the answer. And I think that continues to be true. It's been true for me for the entirety of my life. And I think it has to be true for all of us, that we have to be willing to ask, what do we need to be who we were put on the earth to be? We also have to ask, what are we willing to do to help make sure that other people can find what they need in order to be who they were put on the earth to be? And especially if those other people have been marginalized or oppressed or dealt with in some ways that somehow says that they're not beloved children of God. All of us have taken the vow of the baptismal covenant in some way or form. And in that vow, no matter what the words are that we've said, we basically made a promise to God to follow God and to respect the dignity in all human beings, including ourselves. And that means that we have to be willing to ask some tough questions and to engage sometimes troubling waters when it comes to figuring out how to be that kind of person that respects the dignity in every human being when we live in a culture that has told us some human beings deserve to be respected and other human beings don't deserve to be respected. And we have got to figure out where we're going to stand with that. So we come here to the 21st century, to this spot on this day in October with the realization that though there were many things that we did in the 50s and 60s and even the early 70s to try to make our country a better place, we didn't do a very good job of getting there. And we find ourselves in 2021 struggling with issues around voting and other kinds of things that make us know that we still have got a long ways to go to get to the liberation corner, a long ways to go. And we're all in it together. That's the other piece. And that's so difficult, I think, for people to to get a good handle on at times, because it's sort of like, well, I'm over here and I'm doing pretty well. And if you're not doing too well, I guess you'll figure it out. And I'll just keep on going down my road. It doesn't work that way for people of faith. We don't get to make those kinds of choices. We already made the choice to follow Jesus Christ. And when we made that choice, we decided to be on a different path. We have got to be open to a different set of understandings about who our sisters and brothers are and what is required of us if we want to be faithful people. And I believe that there are faithful people all over the place who do want to see our country be better, and who do want to see us stand up for the things that we say we believe, to practice in ways that really show that we really do believe them, and that we really are ready to make sacrifices to make this country and this place somewhere that everybody can be respected and everybody can have access to the resources that they need in order to be who God put them on the earth to be. I told you that I grew up in Arkansas, and I grew up in Arkansas with an illiterate sharecropping father and a mother who graduated from college the same year I graduated from high school. My mother went to college for at least 18 years that I know about, because she graduated in 1964 when I graduated from high school and I was 18 years old. My mother didn't take that long to go to school because she wasn't smart. She took that long to go to school because the educational resources were not available to her. She had to take what was called correspondence courses and extension courses with colleges around, bringing courses near her, enough to her so she could go be in a class. And she had to take courses that came in the mail, actually. I guess that really, some of that was equivalent to distance learning these days. My mother had an amazing spirit of tenacity. And actually, I wrote an autobiography in the early 70s, and I said my mother's definition of tenacity is that when you get to the end of your rope, you tie a knot in it and you hang on. And she would always say, hang on, because tomorrow's another day and you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Tomorrow is going to bring something different. At least that is what hope says. Hope says tomorrow's a new day and I don't know what God's going to do tomorrow. It's out of that kind of spirit of my father, who was not able to read or write, and my father, who lived with the memory of the death of my brother. If any of you've read my book, Living into God's Dream, the book that I edited with some other writers, you know this story already. And if you haven't read it, then I'll tell it to you. And if you have read it, you hear it again. But my brother, who was 12 years old, died from appendicitis when he was 12 years old, because when he got sick, my family took him into the local hospital, which was like 17 miles from our house, and they were refused services because they were Black and because they were poor, and told, you need to go to the charity hospital in Shreveport, Louisiana, which was 75 miles away. And my father didn't have anybody to take him because Daddy didn't have a car. By the time he got a car and got somebody to take him and got him there, it was too late. And my brother had a ruptured appendix and he died. He was 12. My father never recovered from that. My father suffered from post-traumatic stress syndrome. Without me, I didn't know that as a kid. I know that now because I understand what that dynamic is. But the thing about it is, the thing that made my father so sad and made him so demanding of us, the rest of us, to follow his rules, was he lost this child. He couldn't protect this child. And he was determined that he wasn't going to lose any more children. And so it made him excessively clingy. And unfortunately, I'm here to say, I understand that now because I've got 2 sons of my own, and I understand what it's like to want to make sure you keep your kids safe. He couldn't keep us safe because he lived in an environment that didn't take him seriously, didn't see him or us as anybody that needed to have any concern given to us. And so it's not a surprise that he lost a child, given all of the dynamics in this culture. But what happened to my dad was that he then became bitter. He felt immobilized. He was not able to ever get past that in many ways. I mean, of course, he went on living, went on sharecropping until 70 when he died from a stroke. I learned a very important lesson from my father. And the most important thing was that I wanted to be a free person, as I just told you. So I was going to make sure that I didn't end up held captive to whatever that was that had held my father captive. So I looked for liberation. I looked for freedom. I looked for how can I become the person I'm put on the earth to be in every possible way I could. And I read, I was smart as I tried to do schoolwork as much as I could. And as soon as I was 18, I left Arkansas and said, I'm never going to set foot in the South again, because I felt like my liberation had something to do with getting out of the South. Well, you know, you should never tell God what you're never going to do, because you just might end up doing that very thing. And so about 6 years later, after going to California, going to college and graduating from college, I got in my beat up little old car and drove myself to Atlanta, Georgia. And I've lived in Georgia for the last 50 years. So it's really it tickles me now that I thought I was gone and was never coming back. And here I'm back and have been here all this time. This was the place where I needed to be. This was the place where I needed to do the inner work and the outer work to lead to liberation. This was the place where I needed to come to terms with what it means to be a Black person in America, and also come to terms with what it means to be a person of faith who decides to walk on this path. Because walking on this path as a Black woman in America means that I have to be open to God's grace and healing for everybody and towards everybody. And I have to be very careful what my attitudes are, especially toward white people. Because in my growing up, I never had any experience with white people except as oppressors. You know, the sheriff, the folks who owned the store that we shopped from, that took all of our money at the end of the year, the white man's land that we lived on. Everything was about white people being over us, kind of the overlord kind of situation. And there was no way to have relationships because there just was no space for that in that environment. When I went to college, God led me to 3 of the most loving white people I have ever encountered in my life, who took me under their wing, the dean of students, the assistant dean of students, who was a woman, the dean of women, and the woman who was the house mother in the dormitory. Though I did not live in the dorm, I knew her and was in relationship with her as a student. Those 3 people, along with the dean of students' wife, took me under their wings. They never tried to make me be anything except what I was. They were totally accepting. They did everything they could to help me. They saw me as a worthy child of God who was smart and ambitious and deserved to have a chance. Gave me a little job in the dean of students' office that helped me to make a little bit of money. And the dean of women would give me jobs to do to help me make money, because I needed to make money as a student. But the thing that's so important about this part of my story is that it is important for relationships to happen so we can begin to withdraw our projections and really see who other people are when they don't look like us, don't talk like us, don't think like us. We need to be able to see them beyond those differences. We need to be able to see them as God sees them. We need to be able to see them and realize that there's a part of God living in them. So this way of being in relationships, so that when you look at somebody, you don't have just your projections that you're looking at, but you give them a chance to show you who they are. And then you relate to who they tell you they are, rather than who you made them up to be. Because all of us do projecting. I mean, human beings project. You know, if you're driving down the road and you see somebody driving a certain kind of car, you might begin to tell yourself a story about the driver, their history or something, because that's what the human mind does. When it's got blank space, it'll fill it up. Now, if you tell yourself that story, most of the time it's pretty innocent story. You're just wondering, and you just, you know, thoughts going through your head about who they might be, where they might live, where they might work. But if you meet them, if you had the opportunity to meet them, and you were totally not able to withdraw your projections from them, though you met them, now you get a chance to meet the real person rather than the one that's in your head, but you keep holding on to the one that's in your head because you like your made up version better, then that's where we get into trouble. We get into trouble with our projections when we refuse to allow the truth about the thing that we have made up a story about to come in and edit the story we made up without any information. So one of the, this leads me maybe to talk a little bit about this glossary that I sent to you. And I want to say right off, I have sent too many things to too many people. So I'm not quite sure if I sent you the glossary that has one segment on it. And when I get to that segment, if you don't have it, please know that I will send it to Pastor Karen and she will send it out to you. But prejudice, this is the core of prejudice. You know, the old adage, have you ever heard it, that says, I've made up my mind, don't confuse me with the facts. You know, I've made up my mind, don't confuse me with the facts. I mean, there are just too many people walking around with that attitude. Too many people who have decided they know what they think, and they don't have any facts. It's feelings, it's subtleties from here and there. It's some stuff that they don't even know where it came from. And it's all come to live inside of your head and heart. And now you're going out into the world acting like that is absolute reality. And you meet Black and brown people or other people, that indigenous people or people with limited ability or whatever, and project your understanding onto them rather than taking a chance on finding out who they really are. One of the most profound questions for me in the New Testament is Jesus asking the man at the pool of Bethsaida, do you want to be well? When this man has said, I can't get into this pool when the angel comes to trouble the water because nobody will help me. And Jesus saying to him, rather than getting into that pity party with him, Jesus said to him, do you want to be well? And so do we want to be well? Do we want to be well enough to let go of our prejudices? Prejudice, prejudging. You know, if you look at prejudice, the word prejudice, it is prejudging. We made up our mind, we got a slither of information, and then we ran and created a whole piece, a whole fabric. And then when we got that fabric put together, somebody came and said, no, you got the fabric all wrong. And we said, it doesn't matter, I'm done with the fabric. And so then as a nation, we said, we made up all these stories about indigenous people and who they were and how dangerous they were and how we needed to deal with them. And so we then ended up practicing genocide against them and wiping out millions of them because of the prejudgments of those folks that brought themselves here from other parts of the world and were not capable of allowing the people that they found here to really let them know who they really were. They made up their minds who they were. They acted as if they were who they made them up to be. And then they decided that the best remedy for that was to just see how many of them we could kill. So we had an absolute system of genocide to help us just deal with folks because we didn't know who they were and didn't want to take the time to find out. And we create a story to go with that, because you just can't, there's something in the human psyche that I just believe this, that I can't prove it, of course, because what can you prove really about the human psyche? Because it's a whole spiritual thing. But there's something that won't let you just do horrible things to people without having to justify it some kind of way. So one of the justifications was, well, these folks are violent and they're savages and this, that, and the other for the indigenous people. Started that in the 15th century. We started that whole process, and then we ended up, look where they are. How many indigenous people do you know? How many indigenous people are in your circle? Maybe somebody has got one or two here or there, but there were many nations of indigenous people on this land, and they're pushed off to the edge, or they're dead because they were different, and rather than to deal with their difference, we had to kill them. So what do we do with this capacity to prejudge, to make up our minds on the basis of no real evidence whatsoever? The example that I give here is that it's like somebody saying they don't like tomatoes, but they never ate one. And you would laugh yourself silly if somebody says, well, I don't really like apples or tomatoes or bananas or whatever. And so, well, but I never tasted them. I just know I don't like them because I looked at them and they don't look like I would like them. And you think, well, who are you that this is the way you go through life making up your mind? But we do that with people. We look at somebody and they don't quite look like whatever it is in our minds that told us how they were supposed to look or be. And we decide some stuff about them that's based on nothing except these responses we've got. And sometimes we don't really know where the responses have come from. Prejudice, making up your mind without the facts, and then holding on to it and systematizing it and empowering it by getting other people to go along with with the prejudice to make it a collective notion, makes it possible then to practice racism. Racism, the systematized prejudice that's been empowered by a bunch of people coming together and saying, yeah, this is the way we want to behave toward this group of people. And we want to create systems that will keep them out and let us in, and keep us in a better way, and keep out all the folks that aren't like us. That's what got us here. It got us here to this place today in America, where we have come up with these systems of education and the judicial system and the economic system and the political system, all geared for, excuse me, for the absolute way of keeping the way clear to make sure that white people have more than people of color, that there's a disadvantage, that there is never quite, you're not quite accepted, you're not quite good enough. I tell you the truth, that I would never have guessed in the early 60s, when we were struggling for the rights to be free, that any of us would have believed that in 2020, we would be talking about people trying to keep our votes from being counted. We would have never believed you if you had said that, because we believed that we were working for liberation and that the liberation was going to lead to changes that would be around forever. And yes, we did make those changes. And now here we are struggling up against some of those same issues, because there's something in the human psyche here that it doesn't want to let go of those prejudgments and doesn't want to see the system become turned over so that all of God's children are considered to be worthy and beloved and deserving of having their chance to be whoever God put them on the earth to be. So prejudice and racism, sometimes we get lost in these definitions. I mean, in these, not just the definitions, but we get lost in the energy, not the definitions at all. People have a pretty good misunderstanding about the definitions, but the energy itself that's generated is what I'm particularly concerned about. So you have this energy that wants you to behave in this way, and we allow ourselves to be carried by it rather than resisting it, rather than listening to our hearts that's telling us all the time, that's not the way to be. That is not the way to be. I don't believe that people who held other people in captivity as slaves or whatever, ever at the deepest level of themselves thought they were doing what was right. I think they always thought there was a little bit of something wrong with it, and there was always a necessity to try to justify it, because the psyche needs answers for this kind of behavior that is being practiced against somebody else who looks like you, who looks like you in terms of being human. So then you got to say, well, you're not human, because you're Black, or you're Chinese, or you're indigenous, or you don't look like me, so you're not me. You're not like me. But then you walk like me, you talk, you eat, you wear clothes. So what am I going to do with this dissonance that's created when I look at this being that resembles me so closely, but then I don't want to accept that we are connected because you don't talk like me, or you don't eat what I eat. It's a problem. And when we turn ourselves back toward God, we're able to transcend that problem, and we're able to come to grips with, because God made us both, we can relate to each other even across lines of not even speaking the same language. Racism developed because people couldn't make the turn in the bend in the road. They couldn't turn and say, let me see what's the other way I can look at this. Let me see if there's another way to look at this, and let me try to engage in that. And so we ended up creating systems then of exclusion, and systems of practices. And then we told that story over and over about the inferiority of the people, or the savagery of the people, or whatever we needed to tell in order to justify the behavior. It's difficult. It's difficult to extricate ourselves from it. And part of how this got played out in the United States is we said, if your skin is white, you're better than these people. So we got white skin privilege, which is one of the words in this glossary. We've got white skin privilege, and white skin privilege is supposed to mean that if your skin is white, you're superior some kind of way. And whatever you do is okay, because you're the superior group and you have a right to be free and all of those things. But there's just a little problem of the psyche saying, you're not telling yourself the truth. You're not telling yourself the whole truth here. And so it's a little disruptive. And it's been disruptive since the beginning. And it's continuing to be a problem right now, right this minute, as we sit together talking. And you have to navigate your way. I think most of you are pastors, are already or will be, and you have to navigate your way through leading people who hold some of these attitudes, and you have to find how to do that in some way that offers pastoral care to them, that lets them know that, yes, even though you got your head in a fog here about some things, you're God's beloved child, and God expects better of you, and the community expects better of you. And to do that and manage to keep the community intact can be a challenge. I mean, I know I'm talking to church people half the time, all day, every day, and it's the same thing everywhere. There are people in our congregations, in our parishes, that don't want to be bothered with all of this. They want to believe that we are progressive to the point that we've done better than this. We dealt with race already. We had a Black president, for God's sake. So now why are we back talking about all this again? And I've even been told if we quit talking about it, we wouldn't have so many problems. Well, the truth of the matter is, it's not about just talking about it. Our talking about it didn't create the problems. We're talking because the problems exist. We're talking because we have allowed these things to be etched in our souls, and we have got to work with them. So your white skin gives you privilege. to do and be something that your Black or brown skin does not give you the privilege for, because your Black or brown skin is denigrated as being other, and other to the point of not being worthy. And when you put that out in front of God and God's way of being, it's indefensible, and it cannot be held up as the way in which we go about navigating life. So white skin privilege is then put into play with this whole racist construction, because it is the premise is that because your skin is white, you have the right to the system that says you get the advantage. So the system of superiority that leads to oppression. And the sad thing about this is that if you don't resist it, you're supporting it. So you have to all of us have to come to terms with whatever structures are oppressive in our lives and in our culture. We got to decide if we're going to support them or if we're going to resist them. Now, you might not actively support them, but if you don't resist them, you are supporting them, whether you like it or not. You know, it's been said that if you don't choose to stand against the things that are negative and not right, then you are choosing to help them. But because you cannot be neutral in these situations, you cannot be neutral when it comes to oppression. You have got to have, you have a position, either position of resistance or position of compliance, complicity. So if you're not resisting, though you're being silent and think you're not helping it out, you are helping it by the silence. So it's important to come to grips with that. Another concept that's in this glossary is internalized oppression. And internalized oppression happens when people who are oppressed begin to take in the narrative that has been put out toward them. So if all across the way we're saying Black people are a certain kind of way, whatever we say, and we start believing it, rather than seeing ourselves as God sees us, as worthy human beings who are beloved by God, if we don't see ourselves that way, we are taking in a story that's not ours to take in. But we have done that because if you live in a society where you are oppressed, where you are marginalized, where you are denigrated, then you start believing the projections that are made upon you. If people tell you something long enough, even if they say it long enough, they'll start believing it. And then when you start believing it, then you start acting like it's true. And before you know it, your life is being run by some external message system that it doesn't take your well-being into consideration. People of color, Black and brown and all in between, people of color have got to pay attention to how we internalize the narratives about ourselves and how we behave in response to those narratives. Because there have been many things said about us, many things said that have nothing to do with our being beloved children of God, but came right out of that prejudicial model that was on its way to helping construct racist systems that made it impossible for us to be who we were put on the earth to be. So we have genocide of indigenous people. We have slavery of people of African descent. And though people of African descent weren't just killed off the way the native people were, there were many things that did kill us off, because just travel from Africa to this side of the world was detrimental and caused a lot of people to lose their lives. Now, what I'm not clear about is whether you have the implicit bias section of this glossary. And if you don't have the implicit bias section, I will be sending that to you, to Pastor Karen, so that you can have it. But let me just say, I'm sorry?
We do have it. So they have it,
Great.
yes.
All right. So I got the right one to you. Great. That's good to know. So the implicit bias, as far as I'm concerned, is a kind of nice way to talk in a little different way about the white supremacist system. You know, when we talk about, we like to try to dress things up a little bit. And so we had a lot of requests from people that were in our classes that wanted to have discussions of implicit bias. So I've added it in to the working glossary, just so people who are thinking about all this could have some ways to talk about it and think about it. But what you need to stay really clear about is that bias doesn't just happen up here somewhere all by itself, that it's grounded in this system, that it flows out of this system of believing in superiority and supremacy. Because then that's what makes you try to decide that if somebody, you know, I think this might happen a good bit like in the religious world. People are need to hire a new staff person, but they will say, well, we don't think the church is ready for a woman or a person of color. Where is that coming from? And we talk about it as implicit bias, but it really comes from the whole premise of superiority and supremacy, and they're not good enough yet to do this. So we don't want to have to change. We don't want to have to go through what's going to happen if we bring in this person who doesn't look like us. What is that going to be like? How's that going to affect us? That's the core message that's being played out in this way of, well, I just don't think we're ready yet. And then we can call it bias rather than calling it racism, which is what it really is. But this is right now in our culture, we're talking a lot about these different kinds of ways of being biased toward people, basically people who are different from us. But you do need to just understand that the energy of oppression is one system wherever you find it in the world. Last week, I was talking to a group of people in the Episcopal Church, probably same as the Lutheran Church has groups of churches outside of the continental United States. And I was talking to a European convocation about racism. And one of the things that I said is, you know, no matter where you are looking at oppression, you are looking at the same kind of energy of denigration, energy of marginalization, energy that says these people aren't as good as these people over here, and therefore whatever we do to them is okay. That is the energy system, and it undergirds all efforts across the land of trying to not treat people with respect and dignity and seeing the face of God in them. It was so fascinating to me. They showed a lot of film clips of different things that were happening around Europe in terms of racism. And if you didn't know that they were international, you would just think they came from different cities in America because people were all doing the same. It was the same kind of thing. So when I was in Honduras, listening to people talk about the ways in which they denigrate each other, it was the same thing. It was the conversations. If I close my eyes, I would think, where am I? You know, where am I? Am I in the United States? Because the stories people were telling were so similar to the stories that I had heard all my life. And these were, you know, people of Spanish descent, talking about the people of African descent, talking about the people who were indigenous to Honduras. And it's so fascinating how that system, that system, that negative energy system of denigration and marginalization has been able to cluster in so many iterations around the world and cause so much pain and sorrow. But we know that we are one people. We are the people of faith. And one of the basic things that we know from the bottom of our hearts, or we're supposed to know anyway, is that God has made one set of human beings, and that all of us have been put here to figure out how to live together in some kind of way on this space in this space. And that if we don't do that work, we're not going to be able to keep the planet together. I think it's becoming clearer and clearer to us that we're going to have to get more serious about doing this work. We're going to have to do whatever it takes. And I'm not always even that sure of everything that it's going to take for us to do it. But I do know that these kinds of conversations are critical to that whole construct. There are people who think that having conversations about race is a waste of time. I don't think it's ever a waste of time to have a conversation about anything. And I agree with James Baldwin that you may not be able to fix everything that you can name, but what you don't name, you're not going to fix. So naming where we are, naming the situation, naming the trouble, naming the necessity to go in a different direction is really critical to ever coming up on a solution. And then once that naming is done, we have to turn our intention toward how are we going to actually make this difference? How are we going to go down this road? So I want to, before we take a break here, we're getting close to the break. I'm just always stunned at how fast time goes. I don't know if it felt like it was fast to you, but it seems really fast to me. We have to pay attention to who lives in our inner communities when we are trying to figure out how to go down these roads. I've been talking about the manifestations of all of this, that this is the way racism looks, but what's fueling those fires in human hearts? This is a question that all of us need to ask ourselves. I think one of the most important questions that we can ask ourselves is, how did I get to be here? How did I get to be here as this person with these thoughts, with these sensibilities, with this understanding of reality and the eyes with which I look at the world? What has formed that? What has formed my core understanding of who people are and who I am in relationship to them? What are the stories? What are the spoken things as people spoke? And what were the things that I just learned by hanging around and listening? How did I get here? And I want you to put that question down on a piece of paper somewhere and ponder it for a while. And how did I get here? And is here where I want to be? And if the answers is yes to that, then wonderful. Hopefully it will be that you are here as a liberated person. Most of us are here struggling, trying to get to be where we think we need to be. And I do believe that it is an ongoing journey, that none of us are perfect. None of us have got it all figured out. We are working. We are definitely works in progress, all of us, period. If you removed race from the whole equation of humanity, we would still have to be working on trying to become who God wants us to be. My wonderful theologian mentor, who's now gone on to glory, Dr. Howard Thurman, talks about this whole business of who you were put here to be. And he has this wonderful image of talking about, like, before little babies come to the world, God puts this mark on them, and he calls it God's imprimatur. It's God's imprint. And you come to the world with that on you, and your job is to find out what it is. Your job is to find out what it is and to see what it's got to do with you and to live into it. One of the things I'm certain of, that it does not include denigrating other people. It does not include marginalizing other people. It does not include oppressing other people. It does not include genocide. It does not include becoming a person who participates in slavery. It is about you being out here in this vast universe trying to figure out what's the meaning of life for you, and what did God want of you, and why did you get sent here? But in order to begin to even embrace all of that, we have to come to grips with that we are more than just this person who's walking around here, buying clothes and eating food and living in houses, that we have this whole internal process that's going on in this inner community which is composed of a bunch of little energy systems that have a lot to do with the ways in which we go about being in the world. I don't think we talk enough about this kind of thing in the church. I don't think we help people who sit in churches well, we're not sitting in churches right now, I don't suppose, but sitting online in church. But people who participate in the journey of church going and faith, I don't think that we talk enough about the inner community and what we need to do to allow it to be what God wants it to be and what we were put here to be, and who those inner community members are, or what are those energy systems that exist inside of us that propel us forward, that keep us doing whatever it is we are doing. So do you have an inner community that has some grumblers in it? Do you have an inner community that has fearful people in it? There's an author that I read 1,000 times when I was in college. Her name is Hannah Hurnard, Hurnard. I think a lot of her stuff is out of print, but the book Hind's Feet on High Places was a book that I read. Someone gave to me when I was in college, and I read it, I don't know how many times, because Hind's Feet was this little crippled person who just was trying to make it was gonna go with the good in the story. It's an allegory, of course, of choosing to follow Jesus. The good shepherd was coming for her. And she had so many fears. She had a family of fearful beings that were trying to get her. Where are those places inside of us that are wounded and fearful and need to be nurtured, that make it easier to project onto other people those fears and then try to fix it in them rather than fixing it in ourselves? Because all of this is intricately related to not being able to get past the whole racial construct. You know, the race itself gives us the first piece of other. You are other because you don't look like me. And then you're other because you don't talk like me, you don't think like me, but because I don't spend enough time to really find out if all that's true or not. But a lot of what's happening when we are putting all those projections out onto other people is that there's stuff inside of us that wants to be well, wants to be healed. So I don't know where you might find Hannah Hurnard's Hind's Feet, but if you find it, a used copy probably on Amazon, because you can find so many things there. It's worth reading just to help yourself, because all of us need help as much as we can get, I think. I love Henry Nouwen's image of the Christian as the wounded healer that's out in the hallway with the bandages, telling folks, here are bandages that I found, and there's more down the road. And if you want to join me, we can walk together to find these bandages so we can help each other. I think that's a very important image for us to pay attention to. And the Hurnard book would be great for conversation with people, particularly right now in this time when we find ourselves so polarized. And a lot of the reasons why we're so polarized in America right this minute is because we're so filled with fear. We are so afraid, and we so much need to be of seeking healing and seeking how we can get past some of those internal wars that are going on that make it even harder for us to be willing to reach out to other people and accept other people and let other people be who they were put on the earth to be. When you get caught up in your fear, it becomes blinding for any of us and all of us. And all of us are human beings. And with all the things that are happening now, it's easy for us to lose some of our resolve around some of these issues. And so as I talk about these things, I always want to keep it underneath the umbrella of it's all about our spiritual formation and our spiritual well-being that we're talking. We're not talking about just going out in the world and trying to do social justice. We want to go in the world and be, these folks that are on the right side when it comes to justice and liberation. Well, let's hope we want to be on the right side Excuse me. But the most important thing is to be on the healing side, which requires me, Black woman, you, Black, white, brown person, to be open to the gift of that energy that can help us to shine light on those places that are wounded and need to be brought to God's attention in new kinds of ways, so we can actually be the people that God had in mind, and God is trying to help us to become. So what I want to do now, it's just a minute before 7. I want to take a break until 10 minutes after 7, because I don't think we need to spend 2 hours on a looking at a screen without having a little bit of a break. So let's take a break for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we're going to watch a spoken word piece that's really powerful and inspiring and beautiful. And then we'll talk about that for a few minutes. And then I would like to invite you into this conversation so you can raise your questions or comments or whatever you so desire when we come back from the break.
Great, thank you. We'll see everybody back in about 10 minutes.
My name is Stereotype. Judged and justified by the color of my skin, I secretly wonder if we can ever be friends. I'm the shade of black and brown. I represent legal systems that have sought to keep us bound. Biases, they plaster me with their colors. Are you redlining the color of my skin, making access harder because I have to fight systems from within? Housing, education, criminal justice, just to name a few. Unconscious bias shapes the world and systems around you. Same offense, different life sentence. The criminal charge was being black from the start. Sentenced to black maternity health care issues because the real issue was the color of my black skin. Now, I'll admit, sometimes I feel like 1/3 of property returning us back to our ugly historical ancestry. And I want to cry from within. Can you hear my pain? This pain. It leaves me numb like Novocaine. Knick-knack, paddywhack, give a dog a bone, because I'm constantly reminded that we have greater regard for a dog's life than my own. Melanin, the color of my skin, and all that comes with it. Microaggressions, painful connections, pressure to be something I am not. White America, pain of my ancestors, and the lineage of inequality continues. Housing inequality, Eurocentric curriculums that says to me that my black history is an elective and is optional, just like I am. Eurocentric curriculums, shaping young minds to perceive one side of the story, never telling them that we are all worthy, and that's privilege. All kind of taglines, assumptions, and guidelines to make me acceptable. Targeted by the police, trying to prove that I too am worthy of release, because he suspected that something about me looked suspicious. Racial profiling, never considering that I am falling, and I have a panic attack on the spot. How did you afford that car, he asks. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? Why are you in this neighborhood? This is a nice car. Are you sure this car wasn't stolen? Give me your license and registration now. Then I'm reminded that I don't have a license to be here. His gun is so close to his hip and even closer to my heart. So yes, I'll confess, I was antagonized by the suspicion in his eyes from the start. I held my breath, praying to survive this encounter. This is the story of so many I know. Stopped while black, breathing while black, driving while black, eating while black. I'm constantly reminded until my veins crystallize blue because I can't breathe. So no, I don't have the luxury to go about my day in silence. Not speaking up may cost me my very liveliness. And it's the small things, like the fear of going to my white friend's home, because I was told that her father hates Black people and that because of his biases, we could never get along. But I'll tell you in nicer words, you see, to attempt to preserve parts of my own humanity, because he couldn't see me as human. He saw my Black skin as a threat to human society. He saw me animalistic, and he felt it was his job to hold people that looked like me in captivity. I heard what my friend said, but I figured that I'd go to her house instead. Hiding and not free, I wanted to call my mom to get me. Constantly on my mind, I had to keep looking over my shoulders to assure I'd be fine. Fined for this Black skin I was born in. I've had several experiences like these. If not managed, that paranoia can bring a person to their knees. Constantly looking over my shoulders, holding my purse far out so they don't think I stole it. Having to look them in the eyes, hoping they'll remember that I too deserve to survive. When driving through certain towns, I will admit I take the long way. I know better than to drive through certain towns. I seek to save my life, so I take the extra time to avoid the rounds of bullets to the heart and possibly to my skin. Because the person who stopped me failed to realize and see that I too have a soul within. 911, what's your emergency? The emergency is me, cold-blooded killer, no technology this time to affirm me. So my blood screams out from the ground, seeking for someone to name the ugly truth so that we may begin to reclaim our grounds. And in your line of questioning, don't forget to question what culture has taught you about me. No, I don't care for rap music. I prefer country and R&B. Can you stop for a minute and not judge me? Watermelons, cotton picking, and no, I'm not a great dancer, but I dance anyway to remind myself that I am freer than any of my ancestors. No equal representation, code switching for protection, perceived as a threat, trying not to regret this Black skin I was born in. Guilty until proven innocent. The law has been reversed, and it also reversed my innocence. I had a fear of being judged, so I lived my life in tension. Finally realizing that I can never convince someone else of my own significance. Made in the image of God, I am not inherently more dangerous. I am not more violent. You don't have to be fearful of me. I am not an animal. I did not come from a monkey, and no, I cannot wash my Black skin off. Surprised I can speak with the eloquence you see? These are just some of the things that plague me. Worried for my brother, crying for my mother, missing my father as well. If you haven't gotten the picture at this point, it's all from a hateful, wicked, white supremacist system. Can't you tell? Amnesia. Why don't you remember? You don't see the daily effects of how this traumatizes me or my family members. Look closer. Don't you see that modern day excuse for captivity? I long to be heard, but I'm told to be silent. After all, I'm better off than they were. PTSD, post-traumatic slave disorder. And I fight it every day. I fight the internalized oppression that tells me to just throw up my hands, give up, and walk away. PTSD. Even science shows I remember my ancestors' trauma in my body's cells, that they are in prison cells. The criminal justice system is going to hell, and I fight the thought that things will always be this way. Like Rosa Parks, we've parked in our comfort. We sit on different parts of the bus. We live in two different realities. When we stand up, they hang us. Hang us with their foot on our necks. Get your foot off of my neck. A modern day lynching, a reminder to subject. Gasping for air. When will we realize that this is not an exaggeration? It's an egregious reality for those in countless locations of this great USA. The new Jim Crow internalized oppression, I'm constantly reminded that many will never view my Black life as a blessing. Land of the free, home of the brave, but when I choose to speak up, they tell me to sit down, shut up, and behave. It's better than the massa, though. He beat me with a sword of rings and a lynching rope. But is this emotional pain still worthy to be healed? Are the wicked systems that kill still worthy to be revealed, torn down, like my soul? No Negroes, dogs, or Jews allowed. But when a Black man is beat down, dogs get better treatment than he does somehow. We justify it. We call out his criminal record from a rigged system that prepared him for this. Anger is raging, hatred is taking, no Negroes, dogs, or Jews allowed. That same history still separates us now. You see, telling my story does not victimize me. It is, in fact, the only way that we can start to really be free. Fear and assumptions keep us apart, but now there's a clarion divine call to reset and restart. This will only happen through relationships. They serve as a mirror for our biases and flaws. Together, we can tear down this wicked system of white supremacy that oppresses us all. Hello, my name is Unity. We don't all have to be the same to be free. Your color can benefit my color so that all colors can be free. And your privilege does not have to be used to weaponize me. Meaning well is not enough. Systemic changes will forever change the trajectory of Black births. You don't have to feel guilt or shame. Instead, use your privilege to ensure that my life and the life of my ancestors will not be in vain. Stereotypes annihilate unity. Are you understanding that you have a choice into whom you will be, how you will respond, what you will do, if you will allow fear and silence as complicity to paralyze you? So I ask you again, what is your name? Remember, we all stand on the backs of someone's shoulders. Just make sure you're not standing on our neck.
So Dominique Hardy works for the Center for Racial Healing, and this lovely spoken word piece is available at our website, and you are invited, well, it's on our YouTube channel, and you are invited to visit our website, centerforracialhealing.org, and take advantage of this piece anytime you wish, if you should so wish. I think it's great for discussions because it's short, and you can talk about it and you can show it, and then you have time to actually engage in a conversation around it. There's one other book I want to recommend, but because I did talk a little bit tonight earlier about Indigenous people, and I do believe that we have got to be much more inclusive in our talking about racism to include all of the folks who have been marginalized and oppressed, but particularly our Indigenous family members who have been treated in the ways that they have. And you already may know this book, but if not, let me suggest Roxanne Ortiz's An Indigenous People's History of the United States for you as a book to read, a book to use as a book study. It's an excellent book for just you to read personally or to use as a book study. There's also a young people's version of this book. So if you want to do some things with young people, that would be a great thing as well. Our website, as a matter of fact, we're just in the process of putting up a new website here in a few days, is we want it to be a resource for anybody who wants to visit and can find things there that they might find helpful. And we will eventually have resources for for Indigenous people, Latinx people, Asian, African American, and then just general information about race and racism. So we want it to be a space that offers real resources that people can actually use as they try to do this work in a comprehensive way. It is challenging work, and there are a multiplicity of resources out there, but sometimes putting your hands just on the right ones can be a little challenging, and sometimes it's hard to go try to find all of them. So we're trying to make it as simple as we can. Now, what I'd like to do now is have you become engaged in questions. If you have questions or thoughts or comments that you want me to respond to, I would be happy to do that. I wanted to leave enough time because many times when I'm doing this work, I end up, it's easy for me to get started talking because I've been doing this for 50 years. So there's a lot to say about it, but there's a lot that other people need to say too. And we need to have conversations and not just somebody talking, doing a lecture all the time. So I think it's in the conversation and in the storytelling that we get the best benefit anyway in the long run, because everybody can be engaging together. So I don't know, Pastor Karen, what folks might have on their minds, but I'm ready to hear.
All right, if folks will go ahead and put the question and answers into that chat box or the question and answer box, that would be great. I'll just go ahead and start off with a question. You mentioned several times that pastors have work to do, that if we don't resist, then we are supporting. You know, current phrase you see on signs these days is silence is violence. You know, obviously there's a trend here. Speak a little about that and the pastor's role as you see it.
Well, you know, that's it. And I want to always be really careful about that, because I'm about what I have to say about it, because I'm not a pastor. I spent my life in academia, and now I'm kind of freelancing because I'm a retired academic. I think everybody has to decide what their integrity requires of them in the first place when it comes to this. I know that it's not always easy to speak about these kinds of things in congregations, because there are people in the congregation that have a long ways to go to wake up to liberation. And then there will be people that are progressive, and you have to figure out how to be pastor to all those people and to do it well. And so it's challenging. But I do think that every one of us has to come to some place inside of ourselves that says, this is my bottom line. This is how far I can go or let myself go before I do whatever is the next thing. And in order to come to what your bottom line is, you have to come to what you're willing to give up. You know, what am I willing to give up for the sake of my bottom line? So for me, liberation for myself is my bottom line. Liberation for anybody around me and standing up for helping those people get to liberation is my bottom line. And I've always been willing to give up employment for that. I've always been willing to say to myself, well, if I lose this job because I took this stance, so be it. Because, you know, I grew up in the cotton field. So when you grow up in the cotton field, every job from there forward is not that bad to think about. And so you just decide, these are things that I'm willing to put on the line here to tell this truth that I think is so important to tell. That's an important process that everybody has to deal with for themselves. And you kind of have to process it based on what you have got the courage for, you know, because some people have the courage to be willing to confront the possibility of being without affirmation from the community, a paycheck, losing. When we were in college, we used to say, every time we would stand against racism, well, they can just have our scholarships, because we thought our scholarships were the worst things we could lose. Well, we didn't realize until one day they called the National Guard out on us protesting students that we could actually lose our lives. That was a bit of a shock to us, because we had thought that our scholarships were the worst things that we could lose. But I think that deciding what am I willing to give up for what I believe in and what I believe is the truth and what I believe I have to do is where we have to start. You cannot start with, what do I need to say to these people? You have to start with, what do I have the courage to say? What am I willing to say? And what am I willing to pay for not saying it? Because you might pay for saying it, but or taking a stand or trying to be a navigator for liberation across the board. If you may pay for saying it, but you will also pay for not saying it. Mm-hmm. I think too. So and so sometimes, you have to decide, well, which thing do I pay the most for? I mean, do you end up the suffering that comes to you because you didn't stand up for what you believe in becomes more detrimental than whatever the consequences would have been for speaking up? And then sometimes I think that our fear gets the best of us and we're afraid of something that isn't really going to happen. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger in our minds, and then it becomes paralyzing, rather than if we could just ever take a few steps back from it and realize maybe we were imagining it being worse than it would be, because there was some ego stuff that, the ego does not like to be put down or look bad. So if we do this, we might look silly. Well, we might, but that's okay, because we're standing up to Jesus, and sometimes that makes you look silly. But you might not look as silly as you thought when you do it, because sometimes when you stand up, there's courage for other people to stand up who never would have stood up if you hadn't done it first. And so I think we as leaders are always having to navigate that road, and it's not always an easy road, and sometimes it's lonely, and sometimes it does end up to be painful. Mm-hmm. But nobody's trying to be a martyr, and I'm certainly not out here advocating martyrdom. You not just go out and do stuff so somebody can be upset at you, but if you're trying to be faithful and true, and your integrity is on the line, then you have to figure out what you're going to do. And community really helps. Having a supportive community. I'm really a great advocate of pastors and religious leaders finding communities of people who are who are affirming of where you are with this whole issue of race and racism and racial healing, because you need those folks to help you have the courage to do what you need to do, to help you also be able to take whatever the fallout is. And there's a lot of it everywhere. I mean, in the Episcopal Church, every time I turn around, some of my priest friends are telling me about parishioners telling them they need to quit being political and they need to talk about Jesus. And, and my invitation to them, to the people who say, when you're talking about racial healing, that you need to be talking about Jesus, I think they need to go and read the Gospels. Because if you read the Gospels carefully, you will understand that talking about freedom and liberation and healing and seeing the face of God in people and respecting the dignity in people is talking about Jesus, because that's exactly who Jesus was. So that I hope that's helpful, but it's a challenge. It is a challenge.
You mentioned that who would have imagined that it would be 2020 and we would still be talking about this, that the vote would still be questioned. Is there anything that gives you hope in the movement toward racial justice today?
I think the thing that gives me the most hope is looking at the young people that I thought had been lulled to sleep about a lot of things. And then to watch them mobilize around school shootings, and then recently to watch them mobilize around racial injustice and particularly the deaths of the latest victims of police lynchings. That's been a sign of hope for me, that young people have come to understand that freedom is worth taking a chance for. Mm-hmm. Because you go out in the street to protest peacefully and you may not come back home. Some of those young protesters got killed, and it's so sad to me, because they were just trying to go out and do what they believed in, and it cost them their lives. And thank God it hasn't been as bad as it was in the 60s, because we lost a lot of people that way. it has been energizing to see young people get clear about things are not right. I mean, and we can do something about it. I think I remember before I ended my professional career as a full-time academic, that some of my students they were in their 20s and they'd already concluded that there was nothing they could do about the way the world is. You know, that it's just this way, and it's just got there's a path that's being followed, and there's no way to resist it. And I've always felt like that was a very sad commentary, to be in your 20s and already resolve that the world's just the way it is, and you just got to be dragged down the road by it, rather than, hey, this is not how it ought to be, and I don't like it, and I can do something about it. And so seeing these young people stand up and say, it's not, we need justice. If you want peace in this world, there's got to be justice, you know. And, you know, I'm feeling like, yeah, there's a new energy, a new positive energy that's been set free. And in a strange way, while I detest what's happened with COVID-19, I think this chaotic, horrible time of death and dying in our world has slowed us all down and made us have to stop and think about what really matters, and to be more concerned about having the world be a different kind of place. I think we were just going on this like a breakneck pace here. And, you know, I'm sure you saw in the news, like all the rest of us, how just having those days when the whole world shut down, how much the planet improved. You know, you could actually see the sky in places where they hadn't seen the sky in years. And I mean, the earth, the seismologist said the earth stopped shaking so much. So, you know, all of that is a message to us that we need to change our ways. And I do think that people are listening. So that's a reason to have hope. And it's also the other reason, Pastor Karen, is that God is not dead. You know, that Sojourner Truth was speaking, was in a church in the back of the room where Frederick Douglass was speaking, and Frederick Douglass was lamenting how bad everything was, and you know, and just all off the page with despair. And Sojourner Truth stood up and said, Frederick, is God dead? If God's not dead, then there's always hope. And so I'm with Sojourner Truth. You know, all those things I've just said help me to have hope. But the biggest reason is that God is not dead, and God is definitely not finished with us, because we're all here, and we've got this work that we just got to work on it. And I think we will. I think, you know, I'm every day, my affirmation is we will go forward with the intention of healing in our hearts, and God will meet us on that journey. And it's not some little Pollyanna kind of notion, and it's not any magic about it. It's hard work. It's sometimes work that makes you want to crawl under the bed and say, come and get me when it's over. It's all of those things, but we will go ragtag to the bandage closet, and God will meet us when we get there. So that's how I keep getting up every day and doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah, that's a really powerful statement for you to continue to have hope. You've been doing this work for decades and decades and decades now.
50 years since I was in my 20s, and I'll be 75 in February.
Wow. Wow.
Yes.
You mentioned that relationships with obviously people in the pews, between the pastor and the parishioners, in order to care for people through the change, through the transformation, through the enlightenment. The young woman on the video also spoke of relationships. And then how can we continue and emphasize that work of relationships? Especially between our congregations, which are still primarily white or primarily color.
It's difficult because we've created these silos. You know, we live in we work in silos, we live in silos, we shop in silos, we go out to eat in silos, go to the silos that reflect the ones we already have, rather than getting up sometimes saying, well, I always go there, so let me go this way this time, because I might see something different or meet somebody different. So I think that developing relationships we have to be intentional about it. We have to also be honest about, if we constructed our lives to be that on one track, it's going to be difficult to meet anybody who's different. So it may take a while for that to change, because I go to all white churches and they say, well, we don't have any members of color. And I said, well, so you're going to have to do the best you can, because you can't go out and rent people to come be here on Sunday so your church will be diverse. It's not going to be diverse. But I think that if people are really honest, that building relationships sometimes to people that look like you that you have avoided, but are, because everybody's different. I mean, just because we look alike, it doesn't mean we think differently. We have had different experiences. So even within groups that are homogeneous, if you reach out to some of the folks that are around the edges in those groups, it's some good practice for being open to finding folks who are a different color or a different gender or preference, or a different even the different religion. I mean, if you go out into the larger world. So I think we have to be open to allowing ourselves to embrace otherness in other ways than just race. To start saying, well, there are 5 people in my congregation that I don't know a thing about, and maybe I would like to try to get to know about them. It's not about race. It's about, let me go push myself a little bit. Let me get out of my comfort zone a little bit. Because if you can't walk across the sanctuary to somebody you don't know, you're hardly going to walk across the neighborhood. So practice is important, I think. And I think people always want to start way out there somewhere. And it's too hard to start out there because you need some practice. So you start close in. There's a lovely poem by one of my favorite poets that says, start close in, do the first thing first. Not the second thing, not the third thing, the first thing. And the first thing to do, the first thing is to start owning up to parts of yourself that you don't want to see. I mean, that's really the first work. Because the more you own up to those parts, the more freedom you get, and the more secure you begin to feel, and the more able you become to trust yourself out to reach across boundaries. So it is a process, and I think that people need to be invited into this whole work as a process. And not to think that they started out just realizing that things need to be different and they need to wake up in the morning and have everything be different. That's not how it works. You start getting conscious, and then you put your toe in the water, and you realize that your toe doesn't get eaten by an alligator. And so then you can put your foot in the water, and before you know it, you're out walking in it, and you're going down the road, and because you kept going little bit by little bit by little bit. We don't encourage that, particularly in our culture. We want everything to be as fast as a microwave and as big as the whole world. I woke up this morning with this great idea. It ought to be all full blown and operating by dinner time. Well, the truth is, you got the idea, that's great. It could take you 5 years for something to come of it. And all the time you're taking these little steps on your way, on the way. And God is just not ever in a hurry. And we're always in a hurry with stuff that you can't rush. And building relationships, you cannot rush. And building relationships has to be organic. You can't make it happen. You can't run out to find somebody of color because you woke up and realized your life is homogeneous. Or if you're Black, you can't, well, yeah, I guess that's right. God does want me to know white people. Let me go find somebody white. You can't do that. You've got to turn your intention in the direction of openness, and God will take you down the roads that might lead you to those places where somebody can show up in your life that's different. But in the meantime, you need to stay close to who's right in front of you, because you may have walked past the 5 people that you really needed to work on building a relationship with, trying to go out there and get out there and find out you're not ready. But if you've done this work back here with these opportunities that were given, you'd be more capable of that. So I just believe in that you got to pay attention and listen to what you're being asked to do and not get run off too fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had some really powerful questions that we need to ask ourselves too, of how did we get to this place?
Right.
You know, whose back did we stand on, and is this the place that we really feel that God is calling us to be today, and do that hard, personal, internal work first.
Right. And holding on to other people's ideas about how life ought to be. You know, am I thinking my own thoughts, or am I thinking the thoughts my grandmother told me were the right things to think about? You know, did somebody do something 50 years ago that's got handed down in my family, and I'm still holding on to it without ever interrogating it, you know, without ever saying, why do we do this? What is this about? You know, why do I think this? Where did I first hear this? What were the circumstances? Who was trying to tell me what? And what is the result of this? And if it's messing you up, that's even more reason to say, there's something not right here about this, you know, to tell me that, you know, white people, you can't trust white people. Well, really? I mean, do you know all the white people on the planet? You know, have you engaged with all of them? How do you know that fact? You know, when I went off to graduate school at Emory, somebody told me, well, they don't let Black people graduate from Emory. You know, well, I could have refused to go work on my PhD if I had been dumb enough to believe that. And what I said was, well, we'll see, you know. And 5 years later, I became Dr. Catherine Meeks from the Emory Graduate Institute of Liberal Arts at Emory University. So they may not let Black people graduate, but they let Catherine Meeks graduate, you know. So, but you can't make big generalizations like that just because there's some fear that you've got inside of you somewhere, and then expect people to say, oh, well, in that case, I guess I better apply somewhere else, you know? And if you let people run your life like that, you've just given your power away.
Well, and what's frightening to me too is that we have let these prejudices go unchecked, not just through our own lives, but we've passed them on from generation to generation and have gone unquestioned.
And pass them on as fact.
Yeah.
You know, so rather than, you know, maybe I hear tell, but I don't know for sure. But no, we pass it on as God wrote this. And so you cannot even question it. And yes, you can question it, because it doesn't fit with what God has said in some other places. So,
right. I agree. Let's see. This is from a gentleman who's a pastor in Knoxville, and he says, where I'm an interim pastor, we are on this Wednesday concluding an 8-session class on racial justice. Our reading list includes Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited.
yay!
You challenge, encourage, and inspire me to keep on with this work, not only in the congregation, but in the community. I look forward to adding the Center for Racial Healing to my tool bag of resources. Your inner work references are very much appreciated.
Well, wonderful. I appreciate that. And I appreciate anybody reading Howard Thurman, and especially Jesus and the Disinherited, because that's such a wonderful treatise on the spiritual, the necessity of dealing with racism as a spiritual issue, rather than turning it into an external issue that's out there in the world, like it's not a sociological, anthropological, political issue. It's a spiritual issue, and it may have those components. It may look like that. It's expressed in some of those arenas, but ultimately, you're getting right down to is that it's a heart issue. And it has to be, if you're going to really destabilize racism, now you can pass voting rights acts, and you can make police behave differently, and you can pass laws to desegregate schools, and we need to do all of that. There's no debate about that. But when you get done with that, if people don't get to do this other work, the work doesn't stay, because they come back and they're just constantly, like we see with voting. We have 50, 60 years of voting rights, and every year it's another thing that somebody's trying to do to keep people from voting. Why are you trying to keep people from voting that were born in this country and have every right to vote, or naturalized? I guess naturalized citizens can vote, I think. Well, why do you not want people to do that? So it gets back to that same thing. I'm better than you, and you don't get to choose, and your voice doesn't count. And, we just can't get over it. So that is a spiritual issue. Yeah. So.
Well, if there are no more questions, I can't thank you enough for the time that you.
Well, let me read. I have one more poem that I want to read before we close here. That's about courage, because I don't think you can say too much about courage for all of us. And I don't know if people know David White, who is a poet, and actually Irish English poet. And then John O'Donoghue, who's also, I'm about to read from, is an Irish, he's dead now, but he was an Irish priest who was also a poet. So I think I must have some Irish blood, because I'm so drawn to these Irish people and their music and their poetry. But David White says, he has this lovely image of that every day we just need to be a half a shade braver. Just a half a shade braver. So it's not like you got to get up in the morning and go decide to lead a revolution. You just have to get up in the morning and decide to take a few more steps than you took today, and just be a little bit braver. Maybe push the envelope just a little bit further. You don't need to tear the envelope open and tear it up and go berserk. You just need to be a half a shade braver. I love that image so much. And I have stolen it from him, and so I have to give him credit every time I talk about it. So I've told him he ought to give me some money from his royalties, because I'm promoting him everywhere I go, because I love that notion, and I think it brings peace to think about being a half a shade braver, rather than having to tear up everything and be some kind of overwhelming force when you were hoping not to have to do anything. But this is from John O'Donoghue's book, To Bless the Space Between Us, and it's called For Courage. And I think in this time that we find ourselves right now, having some courage, being reminded of the nature of courage and fear, it is a good thing for us to put our minds on. When the light around you lessens and your thoughts darken until your body feels fear turn cold as a stone inside. When you find yourself bereft of any belief in yourself, and all you unknowingly leaned on has fallen. When one voice commands your whole heart and it is raven dark, steady yourself and see that it is in your own thinking that darkens your world. Search, and you will find a diamond thought of light. Know that you are not alone, and that this darkness has purpose. Gradually, it will school your eyes to find the one gift your life requires, hidden within this night corner. Invoke the learning of every suffering you have suffered. Close your eyes. Gather all the kindling about your heart to create one spark. That's all you need to nourish the flame that will cleanse the dark of its weight of festered fear. A new confidence will come alive to urge you toward higher ground, where your imagination will learn to engage difficulty as its most rewarding threshold. I just love that. I love that image of gather all the kindling about your heart to create one spark, just one spark, one half a shade braver. That's all we've got to be. And I love doing this work on Zoom because I get to stay in my house and don't have to go places. But I don't like not seeing everybody's face. But I just want to say, no matter what this evening has been for you, remember that we're called to be faithful, but we only have to do it one step at a time. And we only have to be a half a shade braver every day. We don't have to be as brave next week as we are today because we're not at next week. So I have been so honored, Pastor Karen, to be with you all. And Bishop, please give my regards to Bishop Strickland and my prayers that he will feel much better tomorrow and going forward. And please, everybody, visit our website, use anything there that you can find helpful, and let me know if I can ever be of help for you again.
Yeah, she didn't mention either the Facebook page, or Absalom Jones Facebook page also is quite active and quite a powerful page. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for your openness and your willing to share your experiences and your stories, your wisdom. And I hope and I pray that all of us can take that spark and go out of this place tonight and light a fire somewhere in our space, in our lives. So
those beehives in your heart, right? Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Take good care.
Many blessings to you. You take care.
You are welcome. Bye.